794 BC, a relatively unknown Amorite chieftain named Sumuabem established a small kingdom along what was then the eastern banks of the Euphrates River. There was nothing really special about this area, other than that it possessed some decent farmland and a small city that in the local Akkadian language was called Babilou, which one translation reads as Gateway of the Gods. Scholars believe that the original name may have been Babur or Babir, which simply means pale, white, or bright in the old Sumerian language. Most of us today know the city by the name Babylon. Babylon had once been a regional administrative center during the reigns of the great kings of the Neo-Sumerian Empire, who ruled from the city of Ur towards the end of the 3rd millennium BC. Scholars today refer to this group of kings as the 3rd dynasty of Ur, since there are only 2 other known dynasties from Ur that preceded it. These kings, of which there were 5, ruled over a relatively enlightened society where the arts and literature were promoted in the old Sumerian language, laws were enacted by the rulers for the benefit of most of the population, and international trade flourished as far as India and Egypt. A network of territories and tributaries that extended from the eastern Mediterranean Sea all the way to central Iran. At its height, the Neo-Sumerian Empire was the most powerful and wealthiest state ever to have existed in early antiquity. By the time that Sumuabem and his followers settled into their new home along the Euphrates River, the Neo-Sumerian Empire had been long gone. In its place was a patchwork of petty states, whose rulers may have called themselves kings, but who in reality were little more than warlords who raided each other's territories for silver, slaves, and women. Sumuabem, though, seems to have wanted more, a legacy. Over movements and investments made by himself and his early successors, Babylon would grow into a sizable city known for its fine, colorful textiles. However, in the centuries that followed, the city would become the focal point of the land that would eventually bear its name, Babylonia. This is the story of a great civilization that revolved around a city and its patron deity, Marduk. It's a story of progress, destruction, glory, great kings, and their noble and often nefarious deeds. And of course, of the people who lived in this marvelous land, and kind from ancient times until the modern day.
Maybe as early as 2700, 2800 BCE. Very, very early document. Very enigmatic document. We don't really know who this figure is. You can just make out, even in this image, there's a figure standing on the baseline here with a skirt up there and the headdress up here has feathers, and you can just about see there's writing. On the other side, there's writing all over the place. I'm going to talk about why that's so interesting in a moment. But first, I want to start with this sign here, this outline here, and this drill hole, which is the sign for mace, shita in Sumerian. And one of the things that we're going to follow over the centuries or the millennia is the mace that the god uses to kill monsters, that the king uses to kill his enemies. It's part of an ideological continuum. Okay, so let's look at the line drawing. Joined by a string, red zar, shita zagin, a lapis lazuli mace, is what he's being associated with here. Over here, nam, en, ak. This n, you'll see again, is a word for lord, one of the early words for ruler. Nam en is rulership, kingship, if you like, and ak is to do. So somehow this is connected with the exercise of kingship. And you'll see why this is so interesting as I develop this theme over the course of time. And down here, nin, gir, su, dingir. This star means both star and God. We pronounce it dingir when it means God, and you'll hear me say it several times this evening. Now, there's a little bit of a conundrum in this case, because we're not quite sure which order to read the signs in. Okay? It's not as bad as it seems, trust me. I know what I'm doing. Well, barely. We're pretty certain nin, gir, su is in the right order. Nin, gir, su. The question is whether the dingir belongs before nin, gir, su, as the determinative, as we call it. God names are almost always written with the star sign, the dingir sign before them, or whether in this case it's actually part of a sentence. And it seems to make sense if you take it as part of a sentence, because the next line says, Girsu, dingir, girsu, and then this sign, this bar here, is me, which means either I am or you are. In this case, almost certainly you are. So this is probably a couple lines from this hymn says, Ning Girsu, you are the God of Girsu. And somehow, up here, you exercise kingship connected with this lapis lazuli mace. I'm not going to go any further with that. We're back very, very early. I'm not going to push it. It's Eyana Inanna Ibgalaka Katum, which means the one who is worthy of the Eyana of Inanna, the goddess of the Ebgal, the great oval. Inanna is an Uruk deity, one of the old deities. Uruk has An and Inanna. And this name really makes the Lagash ruler, this early Lagash ruler, look towards Uruk in either the appropriation of power or the legitimation of power. That changes in the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. This is an object which will be in the Middle East galleries. It's actually a tiny object. This is a centimeter scale down here. Okay, so it's only about 7 centimeters wide. I'm going to show you a drawing, don't worry. You can see it's in 2 registers. One has a collection of gods enjoying life in the heavens, and the other has, I think, a returning warrior god. Now this is from the city of Nippur. Nippur is special among Mesopotamian cities because it never has a king. Okay, we've had 2 words for ruler already, En and Lugal. They don't have that in Nippur. But the chief god of Nippur, Enlil, who is probably depicted here, I think, this guy here, is, in a sense, the touchstone for the legitimacy of your rule. If you're from any town in southern Sumer and you want to claim to rule the whole of Sumer, you have to provision the Enlil temple, and Enlil has to say, yes, you're the king of the land. So there's a legitimacy aspect where the kings start to look towards Nippur and look towards the Nippur pantheon. Okay? So we don't know who all of these people are. This is a little bit mysterious. In particular, I'm not quite sure who this pair of gods is. I'd be much happier if this one here were female, but Holly assures me it's not. So we're going to gloss over that sorry scene. We don't understand everything. This is from about probably 2300, by the way, very, very roughly. What we have down here is a very different scene. You can see there's a hybrid being here, kind of an ostrich person, and here. And this character, who's center stage, has 2 pairs of horns, marking it as a divinity, a deity. And what's it carrying in its hand? A mace. And over his shoulder, he seems to have slung some kind of a massive, monstrous head. Maybe in a net, I'm not quite sure. And I'm fairly sure that this is a representation of Ninurta returning from some kind of a battle or monstrous defeat. Ninurta does this a lot. We're going to talk about this for a few minutes. One of the nice scenes that occurs in a Sumerian literary text which we call The Return of Ninurta to Nippur, describes Ninurta's chariot, and it says, on his shining chariot, which inspires terrible awe, Ninurta hung his captured wild bulls on the axle and hung his captured cows on the crosspiece of the yoke. He hung the 6-headed wild ram on the dust guard. He hung the warrior dragon on the seat. He hung the Magilam boat on the something broken. He hung the bison on the beam. He hung the mermaid on the footboard. So you see, Ninurta has a reputation for defeating hybrid creatures and making them essentially his trophies. And I'm fairly sure that this head is a trophy of Ninurta, who's carrying the mace. So we've gone from 2700 to 2500 to 2300 very roughly. Okay, going down the centuries. We're going to skip physically, materially, to the mid-18th century BCE. Now, all of the texts that come from this period, from the site of Nippur, like this one, the Sumerian tablet, may go back to earlier prototypes. We know some of them do, a handful of them we can show it. Some of them probably were composed in the 19th, 18th century BCE. We can't prove this in all cases. But there's certainly some kind of a continuum. And one of the strange things in the distribution of the data that we have to face, that we have to work with, is that there's very little literature between 2100 and about mid-1700s. It's really kind of a blank spot in the data. We have Gudea of Lagash, big corpus from Gudea of Lagash, who also mentions in Girsu and all that stuff. And then we have a big sort of hiatus. We have lots of kings in the intervening periods who are mentioned in the texts. So all the kings of Ur, or Nama, Shulgi, Amasin, Ibisin, Shusin, they're all mentioned in texts from Nippur, later tablets, hundreds of years later. Okay? So we know very well what the ideology was that Nippur tablets were portraying, and that is that all those kings of Ur, and all the ones that follow them in the 19th and 18th century, look towards Nippur. There are texts about how kings are crowned in Enlil's temple, about how happy Enlil is to make them rulers. When the Ur III dynasty falls around 2000 BCE, there's a ruler of a city called Isin who writes to the king of Ur and says, you know that grain that I'm supposed to be getting to you up the canal? Well, it's really stuck here. But Enlil told me that I was supposed to control the area around Isin, and if you're okay with that, I can definitely get that grain to you. Okay? So all of these kings are playing the same game, and it's all Enlil, Enlil, Enlil. Okay? So this is a Sumerian literary text in our collection. It's one fragment of a composition which is called in Sumerian by its first word, Lugale, the king. We call it the Ninurta's exploits and other titles. Up here, although it's not very clear, again in an attempt to convince you that this is meaningful writing, you can just see this horizontal, and this vertical, and this diagonal, and this diagonal. And that sign is the star sign, which is red, Dingir, right? It's the first sign. It introduces the god name. And after that, there's a triangle kind of thing in a box, that's Nin, and then there's Ninurta, and then it says Dumu, and then there's the N sign again, a later version of it. Little Dingir up there, Dingir N Lila. Ninurta, son of Enlil. It is a text about Ninurta, and it's a very interesting text for Enuma Elish because it's a relatively long Sumerian text, something over 700 lines, and it starts with the praise of Ninurta, and then it elaborates a threat, which is a revolt by a demon called Asag, who inhabits the mountains, who gathers an army of stones, and Ninurta defeats the army of stones, and then organizes the cosmos afterwards. He dams up the mountains to provide constant water supply, to provide metered water supply, and does lots of other things, decides all the fates for the stones. Okay? And then, this sort of prefigures a little bit the structure of Enuma Elish. And when you put that together with the Anzu myth, which I'm going to talk about much less today, which again is in Ninurta versus a threat, you see a pattern emerging. This sort of combat mythology. Yeah?
I spent years looking for you. Do you not miss me because of me, or is it your condition? I'm just me.
Welcome to the Boise Romance Festival.
How are you?
I just love accountants.
That's a coincidence.
I like camping.
So do I.
I thought I saw an Airstream in one of your photos.
Yes, that's my home. That's where I live.
Oh, permanently.
Well, as long as I'm alive.
Oh.
Eventually, this body will be a corpse.
What do you mean you reverse engineered our algorithm?
by tokenizing your questions in an embedding matrix and generating a predictive model for the most effective answers, which I provided.
Morning, Dreamboat. Could we discuss business now?
Go.
You like puzzles, Mr. Wolf? Ray King has been murdered. I need your help to finish the job he started.
Well, how does this all connect?
Most brains seek a pattern that's familiar. My brain doesn't work that way.
Braxton?
It's me, your brother.
Can you be in California in 24 hours?
How about just call it? How have you been? Merry Christmas. Happy birthday. But it's not your birthday. Birthday's November 11th. Unbelievable.
Was your brother up to speed on the case?
So it's been a minute. Braxton, thank you for coming. I'm really glad you're here. Did she tell you to say that? Yeah. Are you happy, Braxton? Why wouldn't I be happy? You're transient, you have no significant other, or...
Do what I want when I want it. Have gun, will travel. I mean, yeah. I think we gotta go get drunk. That's my big brother up there. That was some dancing. Here in cowboy country, we don't mess with another man's girl.
You're from Glendale, Gerald.
It's okay. My brother wasn't having a good time tonight, but now he will.
Is there anything in this world better than punching somebody in the face who's got it coming? No.
Yes. Shut the front door. You!
Hey!
We go over the plan again? Plan? Braxton. Thank you. Are you ready? Yeah.
In origins, Marduk, one of the most important deities in Mesopotamian mythology, rose to prominence in powerful Babylon, where he became its patron and was considered the king of the gods. His importance increased along with the Babylonian civilization's political, economic, and military strength, especially under Hammurabi's rule. Marduk was a storm god and a divine warrior who governed justice, compassion, and healing. He was the son of the god of wisdom Enki, also associated with fresh water. Marduk is often depicted as a man in royal garments, but he is also represented in art with wings on his back. Marduk is the father of Nabu, the Babylonian god of wisdom, and Tammuz, a fertility god who protected shepherds. The Assyrian and Persian kings also paid tribute to Marduk and his consort Sarpanit. Marduk was often portrayed with royal and powerful features, such as a scepter and a throne. He was also associated with symbols of judgment and justice, echoing his role as supreme legislator. He inherited his connection to magic and knowledge from his father. Marduk's most famous narrative is told in the epic poem Enuma Elish, describing the origins of the world according to Babylonian mythology. In this account, Marduk is depicted as a powerhouse hero who defeats Tiamat, the goddess of chaos and salty waters. Following his victory, he builds the world from Tiamat's body and establishes order and the laws of the cosmos, reflecting Babylon's role as a center of civilization and order. Once he had vanquished the beast of primordial chaos, Tiamat, he became the lord of the gods of heaven and earth. All nature, including humanity, indebted its existence to him. The fate of kingdoms and subjects rested in his hands. The Mushushu, a sort of dragon from Mesopotamian mythology, was Marduk's sacred animal. It represents both protective and destructive power. As a guardian, it watches over sacred spaces, but it also has threatening qualities. Marduk's influence lived on even after Babylon's downfall, with his figure becoming embedded in other cultures and religions. This made Marduk one of the best-known deities in Middle Eastern mythologies.
Is never-before-seen footage of British soldiers invading Iraq in 2003. It was taken on the 24th of March and shows Royal Marine Commandos on the Al Faw Peninsula in the southeast of the country. Within a month, they had completed the first part of their mission, capturing Basra while the Americans went north and took the capital of Baghdad. Next, they had to find Iraq's brutal dictator, Saddam Hussein, and disarm him of his weapons of mass destruction. There was one problem, though. Saddam didn't have any.
And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of it soon.
So why were these soldiers looking for weapons of mass destruction?
An axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
And why did the Iraq War happen in the first place?
The security of the world requires disarming Saddam Hussein now. Came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked US passenger planes and flew them into both World Trade Centers in New York and the Pentagon in Washington. Almost 3,000 people were killed.
The idea that the greatest military and economic power in the world could be attacked to that degree on its own shores is unheard of. And it really makes governments reassess the threat of international terrorism.
But the 9/11 terror attacks were committed by Al-Qaeda, who mainly operated out of Afghanistan, while Iraq, they had nothing to do with it. Things didn't add up, so I put that question to Chris.
What the hell has it got to do with Iraq?
Well, I think this is the point. In order for terrorist groups to attain that level of impact in their future attacks, that what they might look to do is to employ the use of chemical attacks, biological attacks, nuclear. I mean, that is the threat they perceive. So George Bush, in his State of the Union address in January 2002, declares an axis
Of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger. They could provide these arms to terrorists, giving them the means to match their hatred. The price of indifference would be catastrophic.
It wasn't that Iraq had a hand in 9/11. It was the fear that Iraq could have a hand in the next 9/11, which would be even worse thanks to the use of weapons of mass destruction. The main source of those fears was Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein is Iraq's dictator. He rules through fear, absolutely. He rules through fear and has a track record of using chemical and biological weapons against both his own population, and he used them during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s.
Saddam had even committed a genocide against the Kurdish people in 1988, killing over 50,000 according to Human Rights Watch, in part with chemical weapons. However, things had started to change after the first Gulf War. In 1990, Iraq invaded the small oil-rich nation of Kuwait before an international coalition led by George Bush's father responded. They pushed Saddam back into Iraq, imposed strict sanctions, and introduced UN weapon inspectors who began disarming Iraq of its WMDs. Saddam was left in power, providing a useful counter to Iranian influence in the region. Successive US presidents decided against removing him, reluctant to get bogged down in a long war. But that perception started to shift after the NATO invasion of Afghanistan in 2001.
The war in Afghanistan looks like it's going really well. You know, they're starting to hold elections, they're introducing democracy. The success of the initial invasion into Afghanistan leads to the idea that something similar could potentially be done in Iraq.
By this point, President George Bush had already decided to take action against Iraq. He was convinced of the threat they posed. But the US didn't want to go to war alone. They needed allies. The natural choice being the United Kingdom across the Atlantic. British Prime Minister Tony Blair already had a strong personal relationship with Bush, telling him, "I will be with you whatever," in a letter from 2002. But there was one big obstacle to British involvement in Iraq.
They can't form a legal case for war in Iraq based on regime change. And so the legal basis for war in Iraq for the UK eventually is to pursue any means necessary to ensure that Iraq is disarmed of weapons of mass destruction.
Harrowdown Hill, Oxfordshire. In July 2003, the body of Dr. David Kelly, Britain's leading weapons inspector, was found here. The tragic death of the man caught in the crossfire of a prolonged and bitter battle between the government and the BBC
Advisor Dr. David Kelly
over why Britain went to war in Iraq. The official account says that under pressure he took his own life by cutting his wrist.
There is no indication at this stage of any other party being involved.
But the method it said he used was so unusual that many people now doubt the official version.
The question really is, does it seem reasonable that he could have died from this injury alone? And I don't think he could.
The official version says he also took an overdose of pills. But is there another story?
They were intent on not only killing him, but making it look like suicide. They didn't want people to know that he was being murdered.
Lord Hutton's inquiry into David Kelly's death had far less legal powers than an inquest.
They didn't have to give evidence on oath. A witness lying to Lord Hutton could not be prosecuted for perjury.
Some say it could be more sinister than suicide.
David did not commit suicide. He was assassinated.
After a 6-month inquiry, Lord Hutton concluded there was no evidence at all of any foul play.
There was no involvement by a third person in Dr. Kelly's death.
But could there have been a conspiracy by intelligence agencies to murder Dr. David Kelly?
He told me it was a wet disposal, an assassination, and one carried out in a hurry.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. All the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you.
I told him that I was homicidal and suicidal.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Going into people's houses like that it might make them more scared of you and sort of more, anti-American?
I feel terrible about what happened to these Iraqi detainees. I'd do it again in a minute.
sacrifice that you've made has been for a cause that has been worthwhile?
I can't answer that question right now.
When people look back on this time and look back on this conflict, I honestly believe they will see this as one of the defining moments of our century. And you did it. It was your courage and your professionalism that did it.
Lots of people in a small area will panic me because it sends me back to being outside that compound, being surrounded by people who were bigger than me.
يعني هو يموت بس مو هسه يموت قريب.
Everything that American troops have done in Iraq, all the fighting, all the dying, the bleeding, and the building, and the training, and the partnering, all of it has led to this moment of success.